welcome to Genesis Global Radio, the origin of information. And now here's your host, Christine Larkin.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Genesis Global Radio, the origin of information. I'm your host, Christine Larkin. On today's segment, we'll be speaking with Robert Clayton Buick, author of his latest book, Assassination, depicting the murders of the Kennedy brothers and all of whom were responsible for their deaths. I'd like to welcome Bob Buick. Bob, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
It's my pleasure, Christine.
Good to have you here. So, wow, this is quite a book. You've got quite a bit of background and knowledge. How did you get involved in this project?
Well, originally I was working on the passenger liners as a steward, and I would work 6-9 months, and it's kind of tedious work because the Hawaiian run is 5 days, and Honolulu, San Francisco, Honolulu, back to Los Angeles, and I would take 3 months off. And during that time, I ventured down into Tijuana and absolutely fell in love with the pageantry of La Fiesta Brava, the bullfights. And thinking about the misunderstanding of the American public as it being a bloody sport, I saw it as a pageantry of art, a ballet of death. So I decided that I was going to write about it, but then realizing that how am I going to write about something that I personally did not experience? So I formatted a game plan to go back to the ships, get myself a bankroll, and wander into Mexico and see if I could venture into the bullfight business.
At what point in your life was this? How old were you?
I was in my early 20s.
Ah, okay. So you were young, daring.
Well, basically what I did was I got involved in a Chinese domino, high-stakes domino game called Pai Q. And my luck was absolutely fabulous.
Oh, nice.
$12,000. Nice. Now, we're talking 1960.
Yeah.
That was like $120,000, $150,000, $200,000 then, comparison to the value of the money today. So off I went to the peninsula of Yucatan. Now, you have to compare that particular area. If you're talking about baseball, this was the minor leagues of the bullfights. Each village had their week of, how can I put it, their
competition?
Celebrating their patron saint for that particular village.
I see.
And the fights went on for sometimes 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row. So I did that for 2 years, and I learned very quickly because most of the bulls had been pre-fought. They were smart. You had to be very mobile. You had to know and I had a manager that was absolutely phenomenal. He knew why a bull flicked an ear. So 2 years later, I went into Mexico City, and I got one of the top managers, and fortunately, I had 3 or 4 or 5 very good bullfights in a row.
You were on a tear. You had a stroke of luck there.
Well, what happens is that the George Clooney or Brad Pitt is as good as their last picture.
Yeah.
Right? Well, in the bullfight business, you're as good as your last fight. Well, I had 2 or 3 or 4 in a row, and they started calling me El Ciclón del Norte, the cyclone from the north. And so I became quite famous rapidly, and every 6 months in those days, I had to go back to the United States to review or renew my visa. So in the interim, I would drive to Mexico City, lay over there 2 or 3 days in a little hotel called the Hotel Luma, and back to Mérida, Yucatan. And when I finally returned to Mexico City and became famous, I bought a condo, etc. I had a Cadillac convertible, all of the...
Living the life.
Oh, no, I was in the top of my game and right in the top of the world. Well, and then came the worst decision of my lifetime, and I'm still paying the price today. Because of my familiarity and well-known at the Hotel Luma, I was approached one night on a dark street in Mexico City by a gentleman who called himself Eduardo and a gentleman who called himself Maurice Bishop. And they explained to me that I almost shot both of them. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and they were following me up a dark street. Well, I had recalled that particular week that people were kind of dogging me in Sanborns when I went to train at Mexico City's largest bull ring, and this one car kept circling the fronton courts where I played fronton every afternoon. And to kind of culminate it in a short sense, they waved the American flag, my responsibility of patronage, mom's apple pie, the whole 9 yards, and recruited me to go into a surveillance program at this particular hotel because of the adverse and clandestine activity that was taking place there. Because everyone knew me at this hotel. I would go there frequently for the botanas, the cocktail, and it was a Tyrene-type hangout for the college students from the University of Mexico.
So why did they zero in on you? What did they want from you?
Well, I was the perfect fit for the main and simple reason that no one would have suspected that I was in there for the purpose of finding out what the heck they were up to. Because the manager knew me. This hotel was a small hotel, part of the Americana hotel branch.
Okay.
And to culminate it again, I sat in a booth on September the 28th, 1963, at 8 p.m. in the evening, across the table from Lee Harvey Oswald.
What was he doing there?
He was part of this particular clandestine activity, and at this particular hotel. It'd be too lengthy to go into it for the main and simple reason it's actually in the book.
Okay.
And my first book, Tagger in the Rain, depicts how I got involved in this particular project. And it'd be too lengthy to go into it with this program. At any rate, he told me that they were going to whack the 35th President of the United States. Now, everyone seemingly is calling this gentleman a lone nut. He was not a lone nut. He was articulate, intelligent, well-read, and he had a philosophical view that was absolute logic. He talked about revolution will not get it for the main and simple reason that it causes devastation and rebuilding for 20, 30 years subsequent to destroying, all of the countryside or the metropolitan areas. And he gave me this particular analytical look as you remove the head of the serpent and put on another one, referring to assassination. And if that one doesn't work, then you take that one off and replace it with another. And at that particular juncture, I was in a total absolute panic, thinking, what the hell did these people get me into here?
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, I went back and I reported it to my contacts, whom I did not realize their real identity until the Watergate fiasco. And when I saw Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt in front of those TV cameras, I became volcanically ballistic. I mean, I said, you son of a... And eventually, what took place was that the Watergate plumbers, and the reason for the Watergate break-in, Nixon would have won in a landslide, but his paranoia indicated that he thought that the DNC had damaging proof of his involvement in the Kennedy assassinations. This was the reason for the Watergate break-in, the basic reason for it.
So where do you come into play here? Like, these guys now have selected you, they've zeroed in on you. What did they want from you?
They wanted the information of what was taking place at this particular hotel. The regional manager was involved in it. The cocktail waiter, which was below his stature. There was a boat involved that was moved from port to port. In fact, it was moved from Veracruz up to the little port. I'll think of it in a minute. But basically, what the plan was to patsy Oswald and then attempt to take him out of the country, dump him in the Gulf of Mexico by plane, or this particular Tampico is the port that I was thinking of.
Okay.
Anyway, I was overhearing all of this kind of bits and parts of this plan because they had no idea that I was actually operating with the company. And when I really think about, in retrospect, what Oswald was telling me was that he was telling me that I could stop the assassination, but that he could not because of his affiliation with certain factions. And what went completely haywire the day of the assassination in Dallas, Oswald finally figured out that he was going down as the patsy. So basically, the whole plan just completely fell apart whenever he was arrested, and all of the officials and all of the people that were involved in this tremendous conspiracy, high-ranking officials, Texas oil barons, etc., they had to take him out. This is where Ruby came in.
So now you've got all of this experience now, and I'll let you tell us about where Ruby comes in a moment. But you put this in a book, and why now? Why now is the book important?
Well, because when I first wrote Tagger in the Rain, most of the evidence, the Freedom of Information Act wasn't there. The people who were actually involved in the conspiracy to take out Kennedy and his younger brother were basically involved in the cover-up. And they were burying all this crucial evidence in the archives for a half a century. They were only giving the Warren Commission what they wanted to give the Warren Commission. Now, there's a lot of twists. There's a lot of surprises. There's a lot of turns in this book. And the only way that I can actually sum it up is if anyone is truly interested in what really came down in Dallas, what really came down in that pantry in Los Angeles when they took out Bobby Kennedy, and what has recently transpired in the World Trade Center. It's all tied together. It's an extremely intriguing story.
So, assassination. Now, let's take a little step back. Where did Ruby come in?
Ruby was always associated with organized crime. Originally in Chicago, he was very tight with Sam Giancana.
Okay.
He was tight with Santos Traficante. He was tight with Carlos Marcello, the New Orleans crime boss, where his territory even reached into Dallas. That's how far it went. And basically, if it wasn't for Sam Giancana, the Kennedys would have never been in the White House. Sam gave them Illinois, and he gave them West Virginia. But he didn't have the power to give them West Virginia, so he had to go to the New York crime families, and they ended up giving the Kennedys West Virginia and Illinois. Without those two states, and then subsequently, Bobby got crazy and started defecating on organized crime. Now, I grew up with these people in Pennsylvania, and it's still very strong back there. I watched as a kid them taking people to the polling places, handed them a dollar bill and telling them how to vote.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's how far back it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was that the people that were responsible and involved in the conspiracy knew that they had to take Oswald out, because sooner or later he was going to open up. And if you see the tapes and you review the whole thing, I did not shoot anybody. I'm the patsy. Okay, continually. Well, he passed the paraffin test. If you fire a rifle 3 times in succession, your cheek and your face is deluged and infested with gunpowder residue. You can't shower it off. You can't scrub it off. And he passed that particular paraffin taste. And his paraffin taste on his hands was inconclusive, because when he went back to his rooming house, he picked up his revolver and put it in his waistband. So you're going to get a minor residue on your hands when you handle a weapon that has been previously fired at one time or another. This is just indisputable forensic evidence.
Yeah.
And what I basically do is I won't write a word. I will not make a statement unless all of that is authenticated and substantiated by 3 different unbiased entities, or my personal knowledge, or part of an official record.
Mm-hmm.
Or
so
they would tear me up and spit me out.
Sure. I mean, it's got to have some authenticity. How did you pull all of this information together to write Assassination? And what took you so long to, kind of relate this personal knowledge into a book? Why all this time, and why now?
Well, because to again reiterate, I couldn't write something and point a finger and say he did it. I had to have substantiation, and now the Freedom Act, Information Act, all of this, the information on that particular dictabelt.
Yeah, it wasn't available until took time.
Not until recently. In fact, the microphone on the motorcycle behind the limousine had the policeman had his microphone open. Okay, all of these shots that were fired were recorded in this what they called dictabelt that was actually sent all of this sounds was sent back to the police station, and at that time they didn't have the modern technology to decipher these sounds until recently. And basically what that dicta belt is telling everybody that there were at least 4 shots fired. But when you analyze the acoustical setup in that Daley Plaza, it's like a canyon, okay? And when Nicoletti and Jimmy fired, they fired like 1/1000th of a second apart. It sounded like a motorcycle backfire.
Okay.
But the 2 shots that were fired were almost simultaneous. And I'm going to go you one better. When I first wrote Tiger in the Rain, the Grassy Knoll shooter picked it up, read it, and his friend contacted me. I have been communicating with the Grassy Knoll shooter for the past 8 years. I have 100 of his letters. He's never lied to me. He's never embellished any story. In fact, he and I missed one another physically on several different occasions. And we still talk about it, how ironic it was that we didn't bump into one another during all of this Bay of Pigs fiasco and all the things that were taking place, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, the John Kennedy assassination, and now all of it is coming to light, all of it is bubbling to the surface. And there are factions that are still around today that were totally responsible for all 3 of these events. I'm talking about John Kennedy, I'm talking about Bobby Kennedy, I'm talking about Ruby, and I'm talking about 9/11.
So you think it's all tied together. What does 9/11 have to do with it?
The same parties that were involved in the Kennedy assassinations were involved in the destruction of the Twin Towers. And
so is it sort of an underground faction, that has this idea of how they want the U.S. to be?
Exactly. And it all goes back to Skull and Bones.
So how can people get your book? Is it public now? Can they get it in bookstores?
Yes.
Tell us where.
Okay.
Well, we've got email, if people want to email you.
To get it quickly, to get it at a much cheaper price, you would go to www.exlibris, that's EXLIBRIS.com. Or you can call toll-free 1-888-795-4274.
Great.
And I'm going to go you one better. Anyone who would like an autograph, for me to autograph that book, send it to me at 23974 Aliso Creek Road, Suite 380, Laguna Niguel. It's same as Miguel, but with an N, California, 92677. The spelling of that word Aliso is ALISO. Send me the book with a return postage carton or either one of those bubble type manila envelopes. I will autograph it for you and send it back to you. If you have any trouble that you lose the address, call the toll-free number and they will reiterate my address.
All right, I'm going to give that number out again. It's 1-888-795-4274. The website, www.exlibris.com. Do you ever worry that anybody's following you or, tell us what it's like to be out and about now?
Well, my son called me a couple of years ago from Mexico. He lives in Mexico.
Uh-huh.
And they're either telling me something or they're dumber than a homemade, bandini doo-doo, okay? What happened was whenever I picked up the phone, there was a 202 area code, okay? 565 something. I don't recall now. We talked for 20 minutes. I hung up the phone. I picked it back up. I read the caller ID number, and I says, okay, that's fine. So the following day, I called the number, and it rang 3 times, and it went bididi, bididi, bididi. Okay, I hung up. I waited 5 minutes more. I dialed it again. It gave me the same routine. I went to my computer, and I punched in the number, and it said United States government, but it didn't give me a department. So I called a friend of mine who was the former watch commander at LAPD on a PM shift. We were good friends. I had a ranch right next to his in the outskirts of Los Angeles. And I said, Joe, I want you to come down here and check something out for me. He was an electronic expert. He came in and he says, yeah, there's a tap on your phone for any interstate and international calls.
Mm-hmm. So,
2 weeks later, it was gone.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would imagine that with a book such as this, Assassination, and your inside knowledge and experience of these incidences, there's so much speculation around it for so many years. Do you ever think that the truth will really come out?
Yeah. It's an assassination.
All right.
I challenge anyone. I challenge the guy who wrote that 1,700-page almanac, okay, which ignored the paraffin test. A former prosecutor of Charlie Manson, which Donald Duck could have convicted, okay, threw all of this bandini doo-doo on the wall, hoping that it would stick.
So we wish you all the best with it, and I want to thank you for being on the show today.
It's been my pleasure, Christine. Thank you for having me.
For upcoming segments, log on to www.genesisglobalmedia.com and keep your finger on the pulse of the hottest brands on the planet.